What's up, humans, and welcome to a new Psicoactivo on a Saturday. Happy Saturday, everybody. I have a very special guest today that I've been following for a while, who I am very glad to say that he's my guest today. He's an explorer, an author, and a ufologist who has been doing a lot of stuff all around the world related to megalithic structures and ancient civilizations, which is one of the topics that I feel the most passionate about. So I want you guys to welcome Mr. Timothy Alberino. Welcome, Timothy. How are you, sir?
Hey, great to be with you. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, welcome to the show. So let's just start because I want to make it clear because I want to talk about a wide range of topics today. Some of them include my ignorance about ancient scripture, which I know you are very well versed in ancient scripture, and I want to ask you about it so I can be a little educated because I don't know much about it. I grew up reading the New Testament with a Catholic family, so that's like the only real knowledge that I have on that. I did read Zachariah Sitchins, and I have read a little bit of Mauro Biglino, but I never considered those like to be, very important within the just like science fiction. But since like 2019, when I started looking at all of this more seriously, some of my previous ideas about all of this started changing and made me question things. And then I found you. So you made me question a lot of things with the stuff that you do. So I want to make it clear I am not a religious person. I respect every single religion and every belief, but I don't consider myself a religious person. And a part of the conversation we're going to have today is based on that I know you're a devout Christian, and just know that I am not. And so any question I ask you is with genuine curiosity, trying to find out what your perspective is. Okay.
Well, I wouldn't consider myself a religious person either. I believe in the gospel of Christ.
Yeah. Because there's been like a lot of confusion from the Abrahamic religions, and just your thoughts on that. What do you think happened when those texts were written back then and those religions were formed? What do you think took place there?
You're talking about the Abrahamic faiths?
Yes, I am.
Well, I would differentiate the Hebrew scriptures, and the reason why I would do that is because you have the Old Testament, in which there's a whole lot of very mysterious content. The Old Testament is to some degree written in the same tradition as ancient Near Eastern mythologies. But what differentiates the Old Testament, the Hebrew Old Testament, is that it does two things. It makes predictions, and it's an integrated message system. So it's not just a poetical text like some of these other ancient Near Eastern documents. Rather, it's a message system designed to convey a very specific message, but also a series of messages. And all of this comes together in the New Testament. And I always say that if we didn't have the New Testament, if we didn't have the person of Jesus of Nazareth, I wouldn't have much use for the Old Testament, because it would be left in that category of ancient mythology from the ancient Near East. But because we have the New Testament, because we have the person of Jesus of Nazareth, and we have the fulfillment of so much of what was foreshadowed in the Old Testament, this is what makes the Bible very unique. If we have this person who shows up on the scene precisely when he is supposed to, according to the scriptures, he does everything that it was predicted that he, the Messiah, would do and must do in the Old Testament. And he goes around preaching and teaching and speaking in parables and performing miracles. And then, and while he's doing this, he's referring to himself as not just a great teacher or scribe or what have you. Rather, he's referring to himself as the Son of God and the Son of Man, which is also very interesting. But he claims to be the Son of God. And to cap it all off, he dies in the manner that is predicted in the Old Testament of the Messiah. Okay. And he doesn't stay in the grave. He is resurrected from the grave, brought back to life. And the resurrection is the authentication of not only his message, not only that he was precisely who he said he was, but it is also an authentication of the Old Testament, of the Hebrew Bible, that it was indeed inspired by God, and that fundamentally the Old Testament is, as I said, a foreshadowing of the Son of God in many ways, that much of the symbology, many of the stories are meant to be representative of the one who would come, of the forthcoming Messiah, which he fulfilled, with Jesus of Nazareth fulfills these predictions and prophecies. And so when you put all of that together, you have a very different document here. And the Bible is a compilation of many ancient writings. So you have in the Bible, you have a book that is in some ways at face value similar to some of the other ancient manuscripts, some of the other ancient mythologies, but in other ways completely, utterly distinguished and set apart from these other traditions, because you actually have all of it culminating in a historical person, Jesus of Nazareth. And the question is, did Jesus rise from the dead? I mean, most people, most scholars, even most historians, will concede that Jesus of Nazareth was a real historical figure. And those who argue that he wasn't are really on very shaky ground, because all indications are that Jesus was real, that he actually existed, and that his life conformed to what is written in the New Testament. So the real question here that we're left with is, did Jesus, really there's one real question, but there's other questions associated with this question. Did Jesus rise from the dead? Because if he did, then he was who he said he was. He was the Son of God. And that, again, it authenticates his message. It authenticates the integrated message system of the Bible in its totality. And what we have then is not just a mythology or a tradition of the ancient Near East like the ones found in Mesopotamia and Egypt and elsewhere. Rather, in that case, what we have is a message from our Maker.
Is the Hebrew Bible the oldest scripture there is, or because I'm not very well versed in it, so I'm asking you. I'm sure you know way more than I do. Are the Sumerian tablets real? Are they related in any way? The Hebrew text and the Sumerian?
Among the Abrahamic faiths, yes, the Judaism is the oldest. The Hebrew Old Testament is the oldest. But if you're going to talk about the traditions of the ancient Near East, no, the Old Testament is certainly not the oldest, because Abraham himself, from whom come the Israelites, Abraham himself was a Mesopotamian. He came from Mesopotamia. There was no such thing as a Hebrew before Abraham.
Okay.
Abraham is the beginning of the Hebrew nation. And so Abraham came from a tradition, a Mesopotamian tradition that predated Judaism, certainly, and predated the Hebrew nation. However, that tradition, the traditions of the ancient Near East, the traditions of Mesopotamia specifically, are not the oldest, because those are post-flood traditions. And according to the Bible, all of those people were sprung from Noah and his sons. So there's a tradition much older than the Mesopotamians, It's an antediluvian tradition going back into the time of the pre-flood patriarchs. So a lot of people will stop at Sumer and Acadia and say Sumer and Acadia represent the beginning of these civilizations. This is the genesis of the Hebrew, of Judaism, and everything written prior to the Bible is therefore this therefore indicates that the Bible was based off of these writings, and there's a little bit of truth to that, because there are polemics in the Hebrew Old Testament that are written in direct opposition to some of the prevailing religious ideologies from Mesopotamia. That's true. But it doesn't matter which came first, the Bible or the Mesopotamian flood myth. The only relevant question is, what is the origin of these stories? That's the question.
Yep.
And which account is more accurate, is more faithful to the original stories. And those original stories would have been diffused by Noah and his sons and would have originated in the antediluvian world. So the whole argument about, well, the Bible is just a copy of ancient Mesopotamian texts is irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant. That's not true, first and foremost, but it's also irrelevant because the Mesopotamian traditions are coming from somewhere else. There's a source material that predates Sumer and indeed comes from the antediluvian world. And I believe that the Hebrew scriptures faithfully are a faithful record and a more accurate record of that source material. And there's reasons why I believe that, but that gets us into very theological territory.
Yeah. Something that called my attention as you were speaking about Jesus, that he said that he was the Son of God, but also the Son of Man. That is like an undertone of potentially having being a hybrid of sorts.
Well, the Son of Man appellation actually comes from the book of Enoch. And when Jesus is referring to himself as the Son of Man, what he's saying is that he is the fulfillment of the Enochian oracles. And if you read the book of Enoch, the earlier portions of the book of Enoch are the book of the Watchers and the book of Parables. And specifically in the book of Parables, much of the content relates to this figure who is denominated the Son of Man, not a Son of Man, the Son of Man. It's a title. It's a proper title. And there are many oracles from the book of Enoch regarding the Son of Man and what he would do and who he was. And Jesus, by denominating himself as the Son of Man, again, is broadcasting that he is that Son of Man that was prophesied in the oracles of Enoch. So Jesus was fully human. He had a Y chromosome. He was a male. He was a human male. And he had to be, because according to the scriptures, he had to be a kinsman redeemer. In other words, he had to become a man in order to redeem mankind. And this is part of the beauty of the gospel. This is that integrated message system that I was referring to earlier. And that's a term that the late Chuck Missler coined. And it's one that I've adopted because I think it's the most accurate way to describe the 66 books of the Bible, which again are a compilation of ancient texts. It is an integrated message system that is an integrated message system that is heralding, pointing to, declaring the gospel of Christ and pointing to the person of Jesus of Nazareth. And again, that is what makes the Hebrew scriptures, the Old and New Testament, unique and distinctive from every other ancient tradition.
I ask you about, I told you a little bit about the Annunaki and the Elohim. What is your take on both interpretations of that, these gods? First
and foremost, we need to acknowledge that Zecharia Sitchin's translations of the cylinder seals are not entirely reliable. That's the first thing that people need to realize. So many people take Sitchin's work as if this is the gold standard for translating the cylinder seals. It's not. His work has been heavily criticized by many, many good scholars, Syriologists, and scholars of ancient Near Eastern languages. The late Michael Heiser, for example, had an entire website devoted to dismantling the Sitchin translations of the cylinder seals, and he got a lot wrong. Now, that's not to say that he wasn't a brilliant scholar. He invented a mythology that doesn't necessarily conform to what is written on the cylinder seals. And that's widely known by scholars, but you have a whole mythology out there. You have Sitchinites out there who are so invested in Sitchin's perspective and his interpretations of that material that they're invested in this, what I would call, to some degree, a fantasy world that was created through faulty translations of cuneiform. And once you correct the errors, and not everything he translated was erroneous, but once you correct the errors, and I'm not capable of doing that myself, I defer to the scholars who are, but once you correct those errors, you get a kind of a very different view of things. And really what happens is you realize that that story conforms very, very, that it conforms in a very interesting way to the biblical narrative. There's a much tighter correlation. And so a lot of the speculation now is, and I would call it speculation because it's based off of faulty translations, is this narrative about the Anunnaki, and they came from a Nibiru, and they enslaved mankind, harvest gold, or whatever that narrative is largely fantastical. It's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
it's Lord of the Rings.
And they get really passionate, like Tolkien fans, right?
Right, because they're so heavily invested in that narrative, and their worldview is based on that narrative. But again, the problem is it's just not well translated. And I would refer people to the work of Michael Heiser and other scholars who have been correcting those translations of the cylinder seals. And there used to be a website, I don't know if it still exists, I think it was Sitchin was wrong, or Sitchin is wrong.
Yeah.
.org or .com. That's Michael Heiser's work. And I think it's conclusive. Again, not to say that Sitchin wasn't brilliant and that there was a lot of worth in his work. That's for sure. But he got the story wrong, and he's created a Sitchinite mythology that is inaccurate. Now, if you take the fundamental elements of his thesis, yes, those fundamental elements are true, I believe, and conform to the mythologies of the ancient Near East in general, and indeed to ancient Greek mythology, in that you had an event in the antediluvian world in which the gods, these beings, these non-human, transcendent beings, descended to the earth. And they copulated with human women. Those women conceived and gave birth to giants and hybrid offspring. That narrative is true, and that narrative is represented in the stories in the cylinder seals. It's represented in the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example. Gilgamesh himself was the offspring of God and man. So the foundational elements of the Sitchinite, let's say the doctrine of Zecharia Sitchin, the doctrines of Zecharia Sitchin, are true. Those are well enough presented to where they do conform to reality, but the details of that he has, and I would say invented, really have caused a lot of confusion about exactly what the ancient Mesopotamian mythologies are actually saying.
And
so,
what about Mauro Biglino's work and his translation of the Elohim? Have you heard about that?
No,
No?
I'm not aware of that.
So that's a little bit different. It is also a translation of a lot of the texts, ancient texts, but he calls them the Elohim, but it's like plural, not singular. Like
It is
the
plural.
yeah,
It is plural. And, you know, a lot of biblical scholars, Old Testament scholars, will acknowledge that the word Elohim is plural. Now, what you're gonna find is you're gonna run into the doctrine of the Trinity here, because a lot of scholars won't mix those waters, Trinitarian doctrine, with, for example, the topic of Elohim, but a lot of others will, and so you get this. You run into the doctrine of the Trinity, and you get a lot of Christians who say, "Well, it's actually the word Elohim is actually pointing to the Trinity, and that's why you have the plurality of it." That's nonsense. In my estimation, that's total nonsense. The Elohim is used in different ways throughout the Hebrew Old Testament. Again, I'm not a scholar. I defer to the scholars, but it's used in a variety of ways. And I think it's much more accurate to think of Elohim as what I'll refer to Michael Heiser's work, what Heiser would refer to as the divine council, the council. Okay. It's an exalted group of beings. I would describe them as extraterrestrial beings who are members of what I call the elder race, this angelic race that is clearly described in the Bible, who pre-exist us, who are probably very, very, very ancient. And among them, you have this, as I said, exalted group who are members of the council. And this group is referred to as the Elohim in many cases. So but it's very much like what we have to envision here is a king and his council. So you have this divine council, and seated in authority over them is the king. And this scene is represented many times in the Old Testament. You have the king who is the head of the council. It's his council. And this entire council, including the king, is referred to as Elohim. And for example, in the beginning of Genesis, you have the declaration, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." And the Reformed position here is that this is a declaration being made by the Trinity, which is, as far as I'm concerned, exceedingly bizarre, and I absolutely do not subscribe to that. I think it's a contrivance. What we have is a council scene in which you have the King of Heaven standing before his council, declaring to them, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." And indeed, man was made in the image of the Elohim. And this becomes apparent in the biblical narrative, because when human beings encounter this angelic race, the angelic race looks like them. Rather, we look like the angelic race. We look like the elder race because we're the younger sibling. We're made in their image. And they're made in the image of the Son of God, who is the King of Heaven. The Son of God is the King of Heaven, and he himself is the image and the express likeness of the unseen, invisible God. This is the theology of both the Old and New Testament. So the Son of God is the image and the express likeness of the invisible God. And all of the other sons of God, he's the preeminent Son. All of the other sons of God were created through him, by the way, and are made in his image. And so what you have here is you have a family dynamic. You have a dynamic in which this is a royal family, and all of the siblings in that family look alike. They bear the image of the Maker. And the Maker, we find out in the New Testament, is the Son of God. So it's the Father and the Son creating the universe. This is, again, these are very theological waters here, but my favorite Bible verse is Colossians 1:15 through 17. He is the image of the invisible God. In other words, Jesus, the Son of God, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things consist. That's describing the Son of God. So he's the preeminent Son. He pre-exists all others. He is the Son of his Father, the invisible God, who no man has known nor can know. The only way to know God is through his Son. This is what the Bible declares. And so you have the preeminent Son through whom the world, the universe comes into existence, and this elder race who are also sons of God, but they are sons of God. They're secondary sons of God. They are submitted to the preeminent Son of God. And so you have this is the scenario that is depicted in the New Testament by the writers of the New Testament. And so this all ties into this question of Elohim. And so in this context, the King of Heaven is supreme, but he has a council. And these are exalted beings. These are members of the divine family. That council and its king are sometimes referred to as the Elohim in the Old Testament. Okay. I hope that makes sense, but that's...
Yeah. No, yeah, thank you. I needed someone who actually knew about it so they can educate me and the people watching the channel, because I did a video a while ago where I found a FOIA document where someone from Hillary Clinton's office at the time requested documents about the Tomb of Gilgamesh, which I found very, very interesting. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's very real. They were interested in acquiring the body of Gilgamesh, and there's reason to believe they did. Now, what they wanted with the body of Gilgamesh, that's unknown. I mean, we can speculate all day about that, but certainly they were intending on discovering the body of Gilgamesh and doing something with it. And Gilgamesh, according to the Mesopotamian lore, was a giant. Gilgamesh was a giant. Now, I think that the mythology around Gilgamesh is contrived. It's mythology, but the person of Gilgamesh, he's a historical figure. And in my estimation, he is actually a giant.
Yeah, that's a nice segue, because, I told you I was going to ask you about this. I know you tell it, you have told it very much, but I would like if you would indulge me and the audience to let us know what happened with that pilot you talked to, and how the story goes about this Kandahar Giant, if you can.
Sure. Well, some years ago, I was making a film with Steve Quayle. We had a company called Gen 6 Productions, and we were making a film about giants. And Steve was contacted by a gentleman who claimed to be an active duty C-130 pilot. And he told Steve an extraordinary story. And we decided that it would be great to include this guy's testimony in our film. And he agreed. He agreed to be filmed. And this was for the True Legends documentary film series. I'm trying to remember which episode it was in. I believe it was in the third episode of the series. And so we flew him into Bozeman, Montana, and we met him, and he showed us his credentials. He was indeed active duty. He was indeed a C-130 pilot. And he did not want to show his face. He was hesitant to tell the story to begin with publicly, but we convinced him to do so, and he did not want to show his face. He was very genuine, and he didn't want money. He didn't want notoriety. He just wanted us to know that giants were real, and he proceeded to tell us the following story. So he would fly into frequently. During the Afghanistan war, he would fly into Bagram Air Force Base routinely to pick up high-value assets. And these high-value assets were usually high-ranking Taliban guys. And again, he was flying most of the time. He was flying a C-130 cargo plane. And on one particular occasion, he's flying in, routine mission. He's picking up a high-value asset. That's all he knew. He lands on the tarmac, but this time, something unusual happens. He's met on the tarmac by a group of individuals who he described as military intelligence. He thinks they were Air Force intelligence or intelligence operatives. They didn't tell him who they were, but he thought that they were intelligence operatives. So he knew whatever he was going to be picking up was very, very sensitive. And as soon as he got off the plane, they told him, no pictures, don't ever speak of this. I think, if I recall, and I may be wrong about this detail, but I think they made him sign something. I don't recall. But he knew right away that this was very serious and highly irregular. So he walks over to the hangar bay to look at the cargo that he's picking up, because he and his loadmaster have to weigh the cargo and process it and load it up. And when he gets over there, he sees an industrial crate. So it's a very large crate, not the kind of crate that pallet rather, not the kind of pallet that we use in you're in a manufacturing plant or something like that, but one of the really big, and they have a specific name and I can't remember what they're called, but they're really big pallets. Sorry, I forgot to mute my phone here. And this pallet is covered with a tarp, and under the tarp there's a body, and he can see the shape of the body. It's on its side. It's a really big dude laying on his side, and he's dead. And the first thing that hits this pilot as he's approaching the cargo is the odor. It was very pungent, very strong, very musty, and overwhelming. And as he gets closer to the cargo, he sees that it's a body, and part of the head is sticking out. The tarp didn't cover it completely. Part of the head is sticking out. The hands are sticking out. The feet are sticking out. He noticed the hair was bright red hair. Maybe I shouldn't say bright red, but red hair. The skin was pale, chalky pale. The hands were massive, and they had 6 fingers. And the feet were massive, and they had 6 toes. And the feet were sticking out in such a way that the guys standing around the pallet were putting their boots up to the foot, just remarking at how massive this dude was. And their feet looked like children's feet compared to this thing. And I'm trying to, as I'm talking here, I'm trying to pull my notes up, because I want to get the details right, because I always forget the exact details. Let's see if I can find it here in 10 seconds.
How tall are we talking, though?
Well, that's why I want to pull up my notes here. I'll try and talk through this as I'm looking for this note. All this is in the film, by the way.
Yeah, I'm going to leave links in the description, guys, so you can check it out.
Those films are kind of hard to get anymore, but all of this is in the films. And anyway, I don't know why I don't have it offhand here, but here we go. And this, by the way, took place in 2005.
Okay.
He was told by the guys standing around the body that this dude had been dead for a day or two. So rigor mortis had set in. An air cargo pallet. I'm looking at my notes. It's an air cargo pallet, and those pallets are 9 feet long. Okay, so you're asking how big the dude was. Air cargo pallet, 9 feet long. He was in the fetal position, and his feet were hanging off, and his head was hanging off.
Damn.
So that tells you that this is, this guy is 10 to 12 feet tall.
Okay.
Based on the size of the pallet. And the standard weight of those pallets is 1,500 pounds. So when the pallet was loaded, before they load that pallet, they have to they take the pallet, they weigh it so that they can determine the weight of the cargo before they load it onto the cargo plane. This is just standard procedure. And the loadmaster weighed the pallet, and they were able to accurately determine that this giant weighed 1,100 pounds. This dude weighed 1,100 pounds. His feet were wrapped in canvas, so he had very rudimentary footwear. We can call it that. His feet were, so this is a primitive dude. He's a primitive guy. And he was living, according to what the pilot was told, he was living in a cave. And the story goes, this is what he was told, and he said it was rumor. They didn't exactly know. There were some guys standing around the body guarding it. You had the intelligence officers, and you had these guys guarding the body. And the guys guarding the body were, I think, Marines or something like that. He doesn't even really know. And they told him that what they heard was that this giant was living in a cave, and there was a team that was reconnoitering this particular region in Afghanistan, and they noticed that the villagers were venerating something in the cave. They were bringing gifts and food and whatever else to the mouth of the cave. And of course, and I don't know if this was a team of special ops guys or if it was Marines, I don't know. But they determined that the villagers were aiding and abetting the Taliban, naturally, right?
Yeah.
So they went into the cave. This is the story. This is the rumor. And obviously they didn't encounter the Taliban. They encountered this gigantic humanoid. And the rumor was that this giant killed the first team. So maybe it was a team of 5 guys or whatever. I don't know how big those teams were, those reconnaissance teams. But it killed the first team that went in after it. And then they sent in another team, and that team brought him down. And again, that's a rumor.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that first platoon was special ops guys or whatever. I'm not sure. And he didn't know either, the pilot. This story is all coming from the pilot. When the second platoon arrived on scene, they again, according to rumor, they found the giant eating on the dead bodies of the previous team.
Whoa.
After they killed the giant, a helicopter was called in, and they transported the body to Bagram airfield. And this is where our pilot picked up the crate with the body, the pallet, loaded it on the C-130, and flew the body to Qatar. And he doesn't know. He dropped the body off in Qatar, was told never to talk about the incident. And he says he heard through the grapevine that the body of that giant ended up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He couldn't confirm that, but he said he heard.
Of course it was.
He heard that the body went to Wright-Patterson. Now, this is, of course, an incredible story, but over the years, there have been confirmations of this story that have come from, in some cases, Marines who were in Afghanistan who heard of the incident. So it's just anecdotal. And my colleague Ellie Marsuli also interviewed a gentleman who claimed to have firsthand knowledge of the incident. We're not sure if it was the same giant. It kind of sounds like it was a different giant.
Okay.
And I have personally come into contact with an individual. I'm not at liberty to release the details, who was in the Air Force, operating out of Bagram Air Force Base and in Afghanistan during the conflict. A very high-level guy. And he has confirmed to me, he told me a fantastic story, and he confirmed to me that it's not about a giant, it's about giants, plural. And there's a region of Afghanistan where these giants are living. They're very primitive, and he said they are, let's put it this way, they are utterly evil. They're malevolent, and they do very terrible things. And they pretty much have their way with the villagers, and he encountered them, and he confirmed a lot. Now that's just, again, anecdotal. I can't give any details about that, but I believe this individual because of his credentials. And so at this point, when we first interviewed the pilot, I suspected the story was true based on the pilot himself. He's a very genuine guy. Didn't want any money, didn't want any notoriety, had no reason, understood he was nervous to do it. He understood it could be, detrimental to his career at the very least. He was still active duty. They could pull his pension, right? If he breaks an NDA or whatever. He was very concerned about that. He didn't want to lose his pension. And I just found him to be a very genuine individual. So I believed him. Now, I could never be 100% convinced because it's a story. But at this point in time, I'm 100% convinced because of the other stories and because of the inside information that I got from a particular individual. I'm 100% convinced. There's no doubt in my mind that not only is this story true, the so-called Kandahar Giant, but there are more of them out there. And the government is fully aware of it. The military is 100% aware of the existence of these giants. And they've been encountered on more than one occasion. That I think I can say with great certainty. So why the existence of these giants would be such a closely held secret by elements of the United States military. Why would they keep that secret? Well, your guess is as good as mine. I mean, we're not talking about the same kind of level of national security interest as the UFO phenomenon, right? Because in that phenomenon, you're talking about technology and reverse engineering technology and strategic technological advantage over your enemies. It's very interesting to me that they would keep this a secret.
Yeah, and this ties into a lot of the biblical history, right? Because potentially these could be, I don't know, you can correct me, Nephilim?
Yes, these would be the offspring of the Nephilim, yes.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you about
inhabiting a part of the world where, according to the biblical record, you would expect to find them. Were there any living today?
Yeah, that's true. I wanted to ask you about that secrecy that revolves around ancient history from the government, because I don't know if you're aware of this group called the Collins Elite. I heard Lou Elizondo talking about them with Ross Coulthard, and it strikes me that they believe, and they're very religious, that the UFO phenomenon is demons or are demonic. And when I heard you talk about this, you're also very a Christian, not religious, as you said, but you're Christian, but you don't believe they're demons. You do believe in extraterrestrials. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Did Elizondo actually use the term Collins Elite, or was he just referring to?
No, actually, Elizondo spoke about a group that is very religious, that has a lot of power. And then Ross mentioned the name Collins Elite. And
yeah, right.
Elizondo did confirm. He said, yeah, those guys. He didn't say the name, though.
Yeah, from what I recall, Elizondo was confronted by a high-ranking individual, either in the intelligence community or in the military, who told him, stop looking into this. These are demons. Something along those lines. And these guys are known as, in some circles, as the Collins Elite. This, I think, is mainly based on the work of Nick Redfern. And I don't doubt the existence of this group. I think it's probably true that they exist. And my thoughts are complicated here. On one hand, I understand their concern, but on the other hand, I think that they are misguided and, in fact, incorrect.
Misinformed.
I think that they have made some deductions about the alien presence that are inaccurate. They're inaccurate both biblically speaking and probably also based on the facts. And of course, why would I say that? Who am I? I mean, maybe these guys have seen the bodies and whatever. But what we're dealing with here, and this gets complex, what we're dealing with here is a Western misconception of demonology, a Western Christian misconception of demonology. And so I have a problem with the terms. Now, I understand what these guys mean. Okay, what they probably mean is demonic. But what happens is you get a conflation of conceptual understanding. So you get a conflation of the biblical reality of demons with the Western perspective of demons. And then what happens is you have this very inaccurate terminology that results, that's used sort of a blanket term, and that's where I have a problem. So in the West, we use the word demon. In the Western Christian tradition, we use the word demon very liberally. It has a wide application. The term is so broad, it almost has no explanatory power whatsoever. It almost means nothing. When a term means everything, it means nothing. When it's so broad that it encompasses many different possibilities, then it loses any specific definition. And this is where we have trouble here. In the Western perspective, a demon, again, let me be specific, the Western Christian perspective, a demon describes or intends to describe anything that is malevolent and grotesque, anything that is scary and phantasmal, or this encompasses a lot of the folklore of various creatures that inhabit in the medieval world. You have all kinds of folklore of these strange creatures that inhabit the forests and basically bedtime stories. All of that's where the Western Christian demonology really springs from, that medieval perspective, that there are these scary, ugly beings out there roaming the countryside, and that these are demons. Well, that's interesting. I mean, that's interesting folklore, but it does not conform to the biblical definition of demons. The biblical definition of demons is very specific, because we understand what the origin of demons are. They are unclean spirits. They are evil spirits that proceeded from the dead bodies of giants in the antediluvian world, according to the book of Enoch. And this is the biblical understanding of demons. It's clear in the narrative, in the biblical narrative, that a demon is the disembodied spirit of dead giants from the antediluvian world. And these beings are ravenous. They're in a very unnatural condition. And this gets us back into the book of Enoch. But in the book of Enoch, when the Watchers, who are these gods who descended and copulated with human females, they're judged in the book of the Watchers, which is the first section of First Enoch. They're judged, and their offspring are judged. And part of the judgment of their offspring, the Nephilim, is that they're going to be cursed to wander the world, wander the earth in a disembodied condition. So they're going to basically wander the earth as disembodied vagabonds. They're going to have all of the desires of the flesh, but without any flesh to fulfill those desires. So I always liken it to this is the plot line of the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie. And Barbosa and his crew, they have they're suffering from this Mayan curse, and they want to break the curse. Why? Because even though they're immortal now, they're immortal in a very terrible way. They can't enjoy any of the physical. They can't satisfy any of their physical desires. And in the movie, Barbosa wants to eat an apple, right? That's how they demonstrate the results of this curse, and he just wants to eat this apple, and he wants to be able to enjoy food and drink, and he can't. And we realize why. When there's a full moon, he's basically just bones, right? He doesn't have the anatomy anymore to enjoy food, and he wants to break the curse. Well, this is very much like the curse of the Nephilim, except in that case, they have no bodies at all. So they're disembodied wraiths. They have all the desire of the flesh, but no flesh with which to fulfill those desires. So what do they want? They want bodies. And so these are the entities, the disembodied entities that inhabit bodies. This is where you get demon possession. And we could talk about this for a long time and demonstrate how this is in fact demonstrated in the biblical narrative in the New Testament, but just understand that is the biblical definition of demons. They're disembodied spirits that proceeded, unclean spirits that proceeded from the bodies of dead giants. That's it, full stop. That's what a demon is in the Old Testament. And so it is biblically inaccurate to go around labeling everything that is scary or spooky or mysterious as demons. It's just inaccurate. That terminology is unhelpful. There may be all kinds of things inhabiting the earth, perhaps even sentient or semi-sentient creatures, crypto-terrestrial beings inhabiting the earth that have nothing to do with demons whatsoever. And my problem is, so this is what I suspect. I suspect that some of these guys, again referring to the Collins elite, are working in or have worked in the special access programs, or have seen evidence of these special access programs, have seen materials from them. They have either seen the bodies or they've seen pictures of the bodies. And probably in some cases what they've seen are gray aliens.
Yeah.
And these beings at face value are terrifying. I mean, they're very bizarre, terrifying looking creatures. They're exotic. They have the large, deep black eyes, or at least they have, at the very least, they're wearing some sort of lenses over their eyes that are deep black, right? But they're very large eyes. They're very bizarre looking creatures. And if you're coming from a Christian worldview, if you're coming from a Christian paradigm, if you walk into a room with one of these bodies laying out on a table, your first thought is going to be, that's a demon. That looks like a demon, right? It's got to be a demon because it's scary. And it's, as I said, it's grotesque. So that's a very, I think that's a very, I mean, I understand why that would be the reaction. I get it. But what happens is, because you have determined that that's a demon, what you do is you blend biblical theology with ufology. And I think you can do that on some levels. I do it in my book Birthright, and be very, stay within the bounds, let's say, of the terminology. But when you do that without being specific and careful in your language, you create this idea that what we're dealing with are traditional demons from the biblical narrative. And when you go that route, I think you run into all kinds of problems. And from what I understand, the Collins elite, if that's really what they're called, I don't know, but I'm sure that something like a Collins elite exists. From my understanding, these guys are convinced that these are demons, and that this entire thing is a deception, and that by keeping it away from the public, keeping it under wraps, they're protecting the public from a satanic deception.
And I think they're also conflating whatever the UFO phenomenon is with some of the apocalyptic accounts that may happen in the ancient scripture. As far as I was told, that's what some of them are doing too.
That's very possible. Now, I do that as well in my book Birthright. I do that as well. But as it pertains to ufology, as it pertains to gray aliens, I don't go the route that these guys apparently have gone. I don't believe that gray aliens are demons. They're in the biblical narrative. These demons, these disembodied spirits, when they inhabit the body of a human being, they're wild and ravenous. They're foaming from the mouth. They're screaming. They are the people who are inhabited by demons are thrown into epileptic fits. You know, you have the famous case of the Gadarene demoniac, who's filled with a host of demons that call themselves Legion, or depending on which account you're reading, it's one or two guys. And this guy he has inhuman strength. He's uncontrollable, unrestrainable. He's a wild man, running around like a lunatic with superhuman power, right? And this is the way that demons manifest in every occasion that they are countered within the biblical narrative. Now think about a gray alien. A gray alien is the antithesis of this.
Yeah, they hide and all
the
that.
gray alien is robotic, dispassionate, calm, emotionless. They're not foaming from the mouth, exhibiting the ravenous and wild characteristics of demons in the New Testament. They have bodies.
Yeah.
And and what happens is in the Christian world, for Christians who delve into this topic, who are bold enough to delve into this topic, some of my colleagues, the way that they solve this puzzle, again, gray aliens being the polar opposite of demons in regard to their characteristics, in regard to their, let's say, their personalities. The way that they solve this riddle is, well, gray aliens are just meat suits that are manufactured for the habitation of demons, which that doesn't solve anything. You still have the same problem. You still have the very same problem. I mean, when Jesus cast those demons from the Gadarene demoniac into swine, the swine went crazy and were driven into the ocean and drowned themselves. So how do we have these ravenous, disembodied spirits inhabiting gray aliens who are completely dispassionate, no sign of emotion whatsoever, just robotically going about the procedures that are reported in the abduction phenomenon?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. It's not, I mean, if you're approaching this if you're trying to approach this from a data-driven scientific perspective, and even just in employing logic, it's illogical. It doesn't make any sense. And so for me, it's clear that these are not demons. These are not demons. These are something else. These are biological creatures, or they're some sort of a biological mechanical composite.
Do you think they could be
artificial intelligence in there?
Do you think they could be crypto-terrestrial?
They could be. That's a distinct possibility. But the problem with the crypto-terrestrial thing I subscribe to the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis. But here's the problem with that hypothesis. And it does encompass this reality. I mean, it does make room for this contingency. You can have, there's two problems I have. You can have let's say the gray aliens are inhabiting the Earth. They're inhabiting the inner Earth. They have bases, undoubtedly, under the ground, deep underground bases. And I think many of their bases are under the ground, under the ocean. So not only are at the bottom of the sea, they're under the ground, under the sea, which is, if you want to stay out of sight, there's no better place. I mean, because there aren't many human beings in the deep sea. There isn't much human technology roving around the deep sea. It's the most unexplored part of our planet. And if you want to stay out of sight and you want your operations to be covert, what better installation could you build than one that's under the ocean, under the ground, right? I mean, that's the best. And so you could have this faction inhabiting the Earth for a very long time, doing whatever they're doing, building up their technology, building up their manufacturing their craft, advancing whatever their agenda is. And essentially what you would have then is a crypto-terrestrial species, right? But what if that species came here from somewhere else?
Yeah.
Then you have a scenario in which they're both crypto-terrestrial and extraterrestrial. Both of those descriptions would apply. You have a crypto-terrestrial species whose origin is extraterrestrial. Now, it is the extraterrestrial hypothesis is no longer in vogue today on UFO Twitter, let's say UFO X. It's no longer in vogue. It used to be the prevailing theory back in the old days because it made the most sense. It conformed to the data. But today, people seem to be working with a different data set, which baffles me. Because the old data set still applies, but people seem to be working with a new data set, which they feel comfortable to derive from this new data set, the understanding that, no, they're probably not extraterrestrial. They're probably XYZ. Interdimensional, crypto-terrestrial, whatever, right? All these other dozens and dozens of hypotheses. Well, that bothers me because you're ignoring, in some cases, the original data set from the old school ufologists. And we know there's a couple things that I think we can say definitively about this phenomenon that seem to be overlooked. This baffles me. We know, for example, that astronauts have seen UFOs in outer space. Have they not? I mean, they've seen UFOs in outer space. Yeah. There's at least a few astronauts who have, some of them, Cooper have directly stated that he saw UFO activity in outer space. Okay, so they're in space, are they not? They're in space.
Yeah.
So if they're in space and they have the ability to move in ways that we can't explain, to travel in ways that we can't explain, and I think, yes, absolutely, they're making use of Einstein-Rosen bridges. Well, what inhibits them from being on the surface of Mars? Like, I don't understand that. Maybe you can explain to me. I don't understand. I don't know where your position is at all, but I don't understand the disconnect here in modern ufology, where everybody's going for these new theories and they're sort of pushing away the extraterrestrial hypothesis. It's like, hold on a second. We know that these craft are in outer space, and not just because of the astronauts. There's sightings that have happened from satellites and stuff that have been leaked of these craft in outer space, and they're moving with the same ease in outer space as they do on Earth.
Yeah.
So I look at that and I say, okay, well, I think there's a really good chance they're on Mars. Why wouldn't they be? Why wouldn't they be on Mars? Why wouldn't they be under Mars?
Yeah.
In other words, in a subterranean environment, under the surface of Mars. Like, that seems to me an exceedingly easy logical conclusion. If they're in outer space, then they're going to be on the moon, and they're going to be on the surface of Mars, as far as or again, probably a subterranean environment on Mars. That seems to be such an easy conclusion, and yet we're moving away from that. For whatever reason, we're moving away from that, and I don't understand why. It baffles me. So it's very possible that their primary habitation is not planet Earth, but that they've established bases here, and it's just like if you and I, if I'm born in America, but then I go and live in Peru, and the preceding generations in my family line live in Peru, they're Peruvian, but our family lineage comes from America, comes from the United States. In the same way, you can have gray aliens inhabiting the Earth, and they've been inhabiting the Earth long enough to where they can be considered, Earthlings, in some sense, indigenous to the Earth now, because they've been here for so long, but their origin, their provenance is not the Earth, it's somewhere else. Like, why is that so difficult for people? I don't understand, and I'm just sort of ranting here, but so, yes, I think that there's a crypto-terrestrial reality in play, and also I think there's probably crypto-terrestrial creatures that are 100% indigenous to planet Earth, that may or may not be Bigfoot. So yeah, I'm totally open to all of these possibilities, but the most logical conclusion as it pertains to gray aliens is that they came here from somewhere else a long time ago, now thousands of years ago, I don't know. But I think I can say with a great degree of certainty that the abduction phenomenon began in the late 1800s. So they probably came before that, established bases, forward bases. It takes time to do that. They built their bases, their installations on Earth, and they probably built an installation on the moon first and then hopped over to the Earth, built an installation on the Earth, and were prepping for whatever their agenda is. And during this period of time, they were getting resourced from wherever else they came from. But now they have such an established presence on the Earth that they're just appearing everywhere. They've got all these bases. They have all these craft. They've established a presence here, and so that seems to be confusing people. But to me, again, the most logical conclusion in my mind is that we're looking at a species, a biological species, and when I talk about species, by the way, I'm not necessarily talking about the little guys with the big heads and the almond-shaped eyes. They seem to be clones. Everybody believes, and I think rightly so, that these guys are manufactured.
Yeah.
Whatever that means. They're biological drones or cybernetic biologics or whatever you want to say, artificial intelligence, whatever. But I think that the organic species are the insectolins.
Yeah.
But those ones are the organic species. And it's really those guys that came from somewhere else, and they established a presence on Earth at least 150 years ago. And now the abduction phenomenon, the abduction program was growing exponentially. We know that. So they're expanding the operation, which means you need more craft, more grays, right? It's just like expanding your business. You got to have more assets. So they've been building more assets to accommodate this exponentially expanding program, the abduction program. So there's an operation underway, but it seems to me, and I'm 100% convinced, by the way, that they are on the moon. And so it seems to me that they hopped over from somewhere else, established a presence on the moon, established a presence on Earth. So this is a very long-winded answer to your query, which was about could they be crypto-terrestrial? So my answer, as I've said, is yes.
But also extraterrestrial.
Yes, but also extraterrestrial.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know. Maybe, and I don't know I have no idea what your opinions are here. But why do you think that there has been a migration away from the extraterrestrial hypothesis into these ultra-terrestrial, interdimensional, crypto-terrestrial. Why do you think that this migration has happened in ufology? Because it has. I've talked about this with Richard Dolan, for example, both publicly and privately, and we're both sort of baffled about this.
Yeah. I think it has to do with not being able to put their finger quite on it, really, over so much time. And also, many of the authors from the late 60s, 70s, they like took over a lot of narratives. So John Keel wrote about everything he wrote, and then Jacques Vallée. And Jacques Vallée talks about interdimensionality so much with his writing, and about the perception that he talks about this trickster phenomenon that plays with human perception. So that, I think that's where it came from. But right now, given that Jacques Vallée is so prominent in ufology, I think a lot of the scientists that are talking about this referenced his work.
Yeah. This is where, by the way, this is where most Christian ufologists hang their hats, is on Vallée's work, because it seems to offer them a convenient explanation that integrates demonology with the phenomenon, with the UFO phenomenon. Now, we have a problem here, though. I love Jacques Vallée. I think he's one of the old school ufologists, brilliant guy, excellent work. Love Jacques Vallée. I like John Keel. Okay, these are old school guys that I appreciate their work, and I think that these guys have done a lot of they've done a lot to advance ufology. So let me preface what I'm about to say with that. However, this is something that that if you read the abduction material, especially David Jacobs, you're going to find that Jacobs also he actually expresses some frustration with some of this, because, and I concur with Jacobs. Jacobs was frustrated with the idea, with the notion that the gray aliens, for example, are just the same old trickster, the same old trickster demonology from medieval times. The sky people, or the fairies, or the gnomes, or what have you, because the data from the abduction phenomenon does not conform to that understanding, does not conform to that idea at all. And when you really look at the systematic abduction program and everything that happens in that program, there's nothing like it. There is nothing like it in the past. There's nothing like it. Now, you can say that, you can try and draw a correlation by saying, well, fairies were known to abduct people, therefore gray aliens are just like the fairies of old. Well, that's a very superficial,
that's a stretch,
one-dimensional explanation, or at least a correlation between abductions. Yeah, the abducting part. But that's not definitive proof that that gray aliens are fairies, or are just, and I know that, I know Vallée's work, on the front of his book, he's got like an alien holding a mask up to its face. In other words, we're the same guys, we've just been changing masks based on the zeitgeist of popular culture. So if the zeitgeist of popular culture is in the medieval times, fairies and gnomes and elves and sky people, that's how they're going to present themselves. If the zeitgeist of the late 1800s, early at the turn of the century, from 18th to 19th century, is Jules Verne and airships and all of that, well, that's how they're going to manifest. And if the zeitgeist of the 21st century is flying saucers and little green men, that's how they're going to manifest. That sounds good. It sounds plausible, but it's inaccurate. That's the problem. It's inaccurate. And I share Jacob's frustration. It's inaccurate. Even when you look at the mystery airship phenomenon, a lot of that was just sensationalism. Okay. 90 to 95% of the mystery airship phenomenon was just sensationalism. It's selling newspapers. Okay. And it's the same thing, by the way, with the accounts of giants. A lot of that was sensationalism, but you take that 10 or 5% that's real, and what you have is the same phenomenon we see today. You have shiny objects zipping around the sky at high rates of speed, disappearing. You have the same phenomenon. Cigar-shaped, teardrop-shaped, saucer-shaped, orbs, same thing. Same thing. Even the Foo Fighter phenomenon during World War II, same thing. It's the same phenomenon as today. And we're not looking at an evolution of the presentation of extraterrestrials to mankind. We're looking at a phenomenon that has a definitive beginning and is burgeoning.
Yeah.
And this phenomenon, as we know it today, yes, do I believe that there's a very, very ancient context for flying saucers and UFOs? Yes, I do, but not gray aliens. Not personally. I don't think gray aliens have been here for that long. Other beings have. The elder race. We've been interacting with them from the beginning. And yes, they use saucers. And this would be that angelic race from the biblical narrative. They use saucers. I'm absolutely convinced of it.
The Bhagavad Gita also talks about this, right?
That's right. That's right. And the Vimana.
Yeah.
So yes, UFOs have been around forever. Yes, I concede that. Gray aliens, on the other hand, I'm not so sure. And gray aliens are the ones that are that I would say we're encountering the most, because they're the ones that are abducting people. And you cannot detach the abduction phenomenon from the UFO phenomenon. You can't do it. Like Jacobs used to say, you know, in the beginning of the interest in UFOs and UFO research, everybody is just examining. All you could do is analyze sightings, and all you see is the outside of shiny objects. That's it. That's all you got. Now you have also rumors and anecdotal stories of crash retrievals and bodies, but all you actually have that you can see, the public at any rate, is these shiny things in the sky that move around at high rates of speed, right? But what happened was when the abduction material started coming out, you got inside the craft. You now were getting stories of interaction with the beings. You're starting to get insight into what they actually look like, what they do, what they smell like, everything. And that material is the best material that we have in ufology. It's the best because you have millions of people who are involved in the program, obviously unwittingly involved in the program, unintentionally involved in the program. And you have a wealth of information, and all that information always correlates. It's always the same stories. Now, you have screen memories that are in the mix that have to be pushed out or circumvented. But for the most part, it's like a puzzle. All the pieces fit together. And that material has been, to some extent, discarded in modern ufology and also conflated. And the reason why it's been conflated is because you have the experiencers in the mix.
Yeah.
They've changed the terminology. It's gone from abductees to experiencers. And so you mix into the alien abduction program, you mix into it all kinds of experiences that may or may not be related to it. And so it's conflated. It's a mess now. Whereas in the old days, and I'm talking John Mack and Bud Hopkins and Carla Turner and David Jacobs, primarily those four. There were some others, but primarily those four who were all highly educated, highly intelligent individuals. Now, there's some controversy about methods and things like that. I get it. They're just human beings. They're not perfect people. But if you take that material, the abduction material, you overlay it on the crash retrieval stuff, and then you think about the underground bases and the USOs and all of this, and you add in information and data relating to astronauts seeing these things in outer space, on the moon, then what you get is I think, a pretty good picture of part of this phenomenon. I think you have a very solid, you can draw, let's put it in these terms, you can draw a logical conclusions based on all that data as it pertains to gray aliens. I don't know about the Nordics and all this other stuff. that's all very mysterious. There's not a whole lot of data. But as it pertains to the insectolins and the gray aliens, we have a voluminous amount of data. And when you
Yeah.
plug all that data in, you can draw, I think, as I said, some very logical conclusions about this phenomenon. For example,
What I keep thinking about though is that we're dealing with multiple phenomena. That's what keeps coming to mind.
well, we're dealing with multiple factions.
Yeah.
So you don't just have the grays, you have these other factions in play as well. And that's where I think a lot of the confusion derives, is because you have it's not just one thing. And you also have, at this point in time, our own craft, our hybridized craft in the mix. Human technology that incorporates components of alien technologies, hybridized craft. That's in the mix as well now. So this is, it's all very confusing, and this is why people gravitate to extra-dimensional or interdimensional and all the other ultra-terrestrial, all these other hypotheses. And to some extent, again, I don't know why I'm ranting on this morning, but to some extent, we've abandoned the foundation of ufology. We've abandoned it in favor of all this new stuff, all these new ideas. And I'm not willing to abandon the foundation, because I think it answers a lot of questions as it pertains to gray aliens. These entities are clearly traversing outer space. Okay?
Yeah.
That's something we can say definitively. They're traversing outer space, which means I see no reason why they can't jump to Mars. I see no reason whatsoever with the technology that they apparently have why they would not be on Mars. So they are an extraterrestrial faction. I think I can say that definitively about gray aliens. They're on Mars, and they're on the moon. They are an extraterrestrial faction. Now, whether they were here first and went there, whatever, they're still extraterrestrial if they're able to get... Go ahead.
Here's a curveball for you. Because this ties into, you say that they're probably on the moon too. And there's a lot of the Andean culture in Peru. They have depictions, they have artisanies, they have stories, a lot of verbal stories, a lot of oral traditions. I spoke to an author called David Velasco, who has been investigating the culture down in Peru and Chile. And there seems to be like this communion about 2,000 years ago of these cultures and some beings that apparently are tridactyl, that they say they came from the moon. That there was a time when the moon wasn't here. And then the moon appeared and these beings came from there. That's the lore.
And it's not just in Peru, by the way.
Yeah, and I ask you this because you've been all around the world. You lived in Peru for a decade, as far as I understand. What do you think about all of these stories and now the so-called Nazca mummies, which are desiccated corpses? They're not mummies, really. You've been investigating the Paracas schools as well. So where do you put all of that into this overall phenomena story?
I think the theory about these entities coming from the moon is intriguing, because you have also on the other side of the world, in Greece, you have the legend, the mythology of the Pelagians, who were said to have inhabited the earth before there was a moon. And so I think it's very possible that the moon was not always around, that it was brought into orbit. That's very intriguing. It's also possible that if in fact those so-called alien mummies, and we're not talking about the little ones, we're talking about the larger ones here, if in fact those are real biological creatures, there's a distinct possibility that they are cryptoterrestrial species, or maybe they came from the moon, and then in the environment of the moon, by the way, if you were coming from the moon, which is cold and dark much of the time, a natural habitation for you on the earth would be beneath its surface.
Yeah.
To be a subterranean species. Now, this is all very interesting because in Peru, in my investigation of the elongated skulls, and by the way, you can see this film. I did I've produced 3 films that are episodes in an unreleased, unpublished TV series. So they're in one of these episodes, documents our investigation of the elongated skulls and the Paracas culture in general, and that's available in my members community. Those films, and in those films we made some interesting discoveries about the Paracas culture. We went over to the Chongos Pyramid, which is an adobe pyramid, and it's located in the Chongos necropolis, which was the epicenter of the Paracas civilization. And of course, the Paracas civilization, the nobility of these people have those very accentuated, elongated skulls. And it's not just that their skulls are elongated; their eye sockets are larger. There's some very strange anatomical differences between them and regular human beings, and I demonstrate this in the film. And we discovered something very interesting about this culture. Years ago, I had come across some papers that were written by Julio Tejo. Julio Tejo is the most esteemed archaeologist ever in the history of Peru. And he discovered the Paracas culture, among other things. He's their most eminent archaeologist. And Julio Tejo, in this paper, he mentioned that there was something very interesting about the Paracas people, in that they liked to dwell underground, that he had discovered subterranean dwellings. And he thought that this was quite bizarre. And I was reading that paper and I thought, now that is very interesting. And there's not much information on it, and not many people talk about that. But that always stuck in my mind. And that was something that I never forgot. And then fast forward some years later, I'm in Peru doing this investigation of the Paracas people, among other things. And we're in the desert, and we're driving by the Chongos Pyramid, which I knew was a habitation of the Paracas culture. And I'm looking over at this pyramid as we're driving by, and I had this strong intimation that there was something beneath it. I thought to myself, there's something under that pyramid. I know there's and specifically I said to myself and to my colleagues who were with me, my team, there's a tunnel under that pyramid. I'm telling you, there's a tunnel under that pyramid, and we need to GPR it. And long story short, we did. We have a state-of-the-art ground-penetrating radar that operates off of a drone platform, and it's very, very powerful radar. We can see up to 100 feet. No, check that, 300 feet beneath the surface of the Earth.
Whoa!
And we can see 15 to 20 feet at high resolution. In other words, we can see a quarter, 15 feet under the ground. And we deployed this technology at the Chongos Pyramid. Sure enough, we found 2 massive artificial tunnels beneath that pyramid.
Massive.
You could drive a semi-truck through them.
No way.
And furthermore, we went out into the Paracas National Reserve, and something that not many people understand about the Paracas people is that they were subterranean. They were subterranean. So they would, on the coast, in the Paracas National Reserve to this day, again, not many people are aware of this, you can go and see their old habitations, their old dwellings. And the way that they would construct these is, first they would dig into the ground 15, 20 feet, dig out a chamber, and then they would take the skeletal structure of a whale with its backbone and ribs, and they would use that as the roof, as the rafters. And then they would take earth, and they would cover it with earth, but not just earth, they would cover it with organic material, like seal bones and flesh and fish flesh. And why would they do that? Because the decomposition of that material would create a heating effect, and it would organically heat the interior of these underground dwellings. Very, very ingenious. That's why, and we went out there and filmed all this. That's why to this day, if you go out there, you walk around on these domes, essentially, earthen domes, and they're oblong. They're like, the way that we refer to them is they're like underground longhouses. And I was out there with my colleagues, Eli Marsuli and Chase Kletsky. So we confirmed that the Paracas people were in the habit of dwelling underground. They have these elongated skulls and unusually large eyes, which would be very useful if you were subterranean.
Yeah.
And so, and they were apparently building these, by the way, those tunnels that you could drive a semi-truck through that are artificial were 100 feet beneath the pyramid. So put all of this together. Let's add in these alleged alien mummies in Peru. When you put all this together, you have a very interesting scenario. Is it possible that the Paracas culture interacted with and mated with a indigenous crypto-terrestrial subterranean non-human species? I think it's in the realm of possibility here based on these discoveries. But there's not a whole lot more I can say about that because, as you know, I'm still investigating all of that, and I don't know whether or not those mummies are real. That's why I haven't made any public. That's why I haven't had any public commentary about them. The jury's still out. It is Peru, and Peru is a minefield of hoaxes as it pertains to artifacts. And there's a lot of trafficking of artifacts. And so I always reserve my analysis until I feel like I have enough data, and I don't have enough data. I don't know enough about the research and the researchers in regard to those mummies to be able to say whether or not I think they're real. So I'd have to say it's 50-50 for me on the larger ones. I don't even want to comment on the smaller ones. I don't think those are real. I think those are the smaller ones are likely. I think I have enough information on those to say they likely have been manufactured. I think they're ancient, and I think they're composites. Maybe they're meant to look like the actual biological creatures. Maybe those are supposed to be effigies of those creatures, but I don't know. But
if they're like ancient constructions, it is pretty interesting how they made them and how the manufacture of them is so I don't know, it's very sophisticated.
Well, the mummification process of the Inca was very sophisticated. They were so good at mummifying things, not just people, animals as well, that in the Coricancha, their central temple complex of the Inca, the center of their empire, in fact, in that temple, in the various rooms in that temple, they had the mummified bodies of previous emperors, previous Inca kings. They're extremely well preserved. In fact, every year on the winter solstice, they would take them out during the Inti Raymi festival, and they would put them on they would carry them around on their shoulders and on thrones, and they would parade these bodies, these mummified bodies around the city of Cusco. And they were very lifelike. So the Inca and the pre-Inca cultures were exceptionally good at mummifying
What
bodies.
does puzzle me about the little ones is that when you see the tomographies, so one of them has eggs inside of it.
Maybe they incorporated the abdomen of some creature that produces eggs.
Yeah,
a reptile or a bird. I don't know. I mean, that's why I say there's not enough. You got to cut one of those things open. You got to extract those eggs and see what they're made of.
That's so difficult right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what you have to do. That's why I lean for the little ones. I lean in the direction that it's not accurate to say they're fake. I think they're actual archaeological artifacts.
Yeah.
So it's not accurate to say they're fake. I'm just not convinced that those were living, breathing biological creatures. Yeah. Whereas the larger ones, I think there may be something there. But the jury's out on that in my mind. But
I have a couple of final things to ask you, just two more. If you have a little more time, do you?
Sure.
Yeah. You said you were doing other things in Peru during that decade. I want to ask you specifically, is it true that you investigated the Pelacara phenomenon?
Yeah, I went down to Peru last year
What was that like?
last October
What did you
to
come up
investigate.
with?
Well, we went over there and we went to the village of. Oh my God, I just drew a blank. It's been a long time since I've talked about this. It'll come to me in a minute. We went up the river Nainai, up 2 days up the river. I chartered a riverboat and San Antonio de Pintuyacu, up the Pintuyacu River. And these are the Akitu people, very old tribe there in the Amazon. And this was one of the last villages in that stretch of jungle. So there was actually the provincial government had installed a communications outpost there. And this is why they had internet and they were able to upload the videos that they were capturing. And so we went out there and I took my friend Doug Thornton with me. And we went and conducted an investigation, interviewed a lot of people in the village, and they all told me the same story. All of their stories correlated, and these people were very serious. They were not making stories up. I mean, I'd get a group of guys surrounding me, men and women, and just telling me, all the details of these encounters, and they were very disturbed. And long story short, to cut a long story short, we determined that the villagers had indeed been invaded, I think we can use that terminology, by a very mysterious group of people who were in possession of advanced technology, both in terms of body armor and advanced aerospace vehicles. Both. Okay. They were deploying from, nobody knows where they were coming from, but they were deploying to the village on these saucer-shaped hoverboards. And no, they're not like those hoverboards that were, they're not exactly like the hoverboards that, the conventional hoverboard technology that I forget, there's I think it's a French inventor who made this hoverboard that you can stand on. There's something like that, certainly, but they're not that. They're much more advanced than that. Okay. The capabilities of these things are remarkable, and they don't make that noise. They don't make any noise at all. They make a slight noise when they lift off and when they land, but for the most part, they're quiet. So at the very least, they incorporate some sort of stealth technology, and they're much more advanced. The boots seem to snap into these hoverboards. And they're saucer shaped. They're saucer shaped hoverboards. The boots seem to snap into them, and perhaps magnetically, and the technology seems to be activated on the boots. And in fact, one of the guys told me his encounter with one of these Pelacaras, the face peelers, that's what they call them, is very interesting, because he said, whereas a lot of the villagers said that they saw the guys on the hoverboards, and sometimes 2 by 2, by the way, 2 guys standing on one hoverboard, like a large one. They always came 2 by 2. He said that he encountered a couple of these guys at night with his flashlight, very close proximity, like 10 feet, 15 feet. And he said they were not on hoverboards. He clearly saw their feet. They were hovering off the ground by some kind of technology that was incorporated into their footwear, into their boots. Oh, he said the boots had like two little saucers on the bottom, and they were emitting a light. And these guys were dressed head to foot in black armored bodysuits.
So whoever these guys were probably were testing this tech in some area.
I don't know, but many of the villagers encountered them.
Anybody
Not just
die?
like 2 or 3, dozens and dozens of the villagers encountered them. They saw them. They either saw them on the hoverboards, or they saw them making an incursion into the village. Sometimes the guys were walking, these assailants were walking. Sometimes they were floating. Sometimes they were hovering on these boards. But they did attempt to abduct one young lady in particular, 15-year-old girl named Talia. And they tried to abduct her from her backyard in the middle of the village. And I tell that story in my video on YouTube. I have a whole expedition report on that with video. and they tried to abduct her and cut her face off. So
The hell?
the interesting thing is, she reports that she heard them speaking in Spanish. One of them spoke with your typical Peruvian accent, so he was apparently a Peruvian guy, and the other one spoke with a gringo accent, a very heavy gringo accent. They were described as being unusually tall. Everyone said taller than me. Everybody said, I always say, my height? No, taller. And so I'd go, this high? Yeah, about that high. So about a foot taller than me. So about 7 foot. Some people said even high. Some people said like 8 foot. But who knows? I mean, it's nighttime.
Yeah.
People exaggerate, especially the villagers are going to exaggerate. But what was most remarkable to me was the accounts of the craft. There were there were probably 5 or 6 or 7 people who told me about the craft. They saw it. They saw it at low altitude. And 30 feet, and they described the craft in the exact same way. It's a delta shape. No, it's a shape like an acorn.
Okay.
Like an acorn on its side. So if you're looking up at it, it looks like an acorn on its side, more or less. And one of the gentlemen in the village said that he was at 3 o'clock in the morning pulling up his nets, or 2 o'clock in the morning. It was completely dark. He's pulling up his nets in the colcha there, in the little runoff from the river. And he said it was like somebody turned the lights on. Suddenly, somebody turned the lights on. And he said it was like the sun came up all of a sudden all around him. And he looks up, and there's this craft hovering above him, 30 feet, 40 feet above him. And it's shining a light down. And he said it was transparent. He said he could see sort of like a mesh. He could see the structure of the craft, and it looked like an acorn. And there was some kind of a mesh, but it was transparent, partly transparent, because he could see 2 guys inside of it.
Weird.
And the craft was silent, hovering above him, and it had a series of lights on it. He described the lights. It had these little rounded protrusions on the side that, as he was looking at it, it opened up, and it deployed these little. They're not wings. They were he drew it for me on an acrylic chalkboard. And again, all of this is documented in my YouTube video. You can see him drawing the craft on the acrylic chalkboard. Had these little, they weren't wings. They opened up, and they had a series of blinking lights. Like he said, it was almost like it was scanning. And then it closed, and then the craft began to move off. Okay. And he said when it started to move away, there was like a low frequency hum. Okay. But there were no propellers. There were no engines, there was no propulsion system to speak of. And he said, by the way, these guys watch all the Marvel movies. They watch all the same stuff we do because they have internet there in the village, in the tambo, what they call the tambo, this communications installation that the government built. So they have internet. If you're there at night, you'll see some of the young people sitting around watching movies on their cell phone.
Yeah.
Which is unusual in these villages, but this happens to be a very important village for this communications installation. And so, they happen to have satellite internet there. So they know what a helicopter is. They know what an airplane is. They're not going to confuse this craft with some conventional craft. They know that what they're looking at is not like those things. And they all drew it. Like a couple of them drew it in the dirt for me, this craft, and it was always the same. Always the same. Always this acorn-shaped thing. Now, when I say acorn, it came to more of a point in the front, but it was generally speaking shaped like an acorn.
Yeah.
On its side, not like vertical, on its side. So it's not a bell-shaped craft. You got to picture an acorn on its side, and if you're looking up at that shape, not exactly that, but more or less, it's.
That's interesting.
And so you're not just dealing with these assailants who are in these armored bodysuits. Very possibly, I think it's possible that they're in exosuits. That they've got some sort of technology incorporated that allows them to run faster, to hover off the ground, to perform extraordinary physical feats. One lady said that she saw one jump over her house or onto the roof and then bound off of the roof. One guy said that he and a few of his friends were pursuing one of these guys in the jungle, running after them with flashlights. He said, I can't explain how this thing moved. He said it was inhuman the way it moved. It had an inhuman agility. It jumped into the river, swam across the river to the other side. at a
That's
very high
so
level. I mean,
weird.
very, very dexterous, agile. And some of the people in the village believe they're extraterrestrials. Others believe they're just face peelers, and the face peeler phenomenon, it's a legend. It's an old legend, not an old legend. It goes back to the 80s, not any further than the 80s. It goes back to the mid 80s. And if you talk to the villagers, the indigenous people, about the face peelers, they all know what the face peelers are. And some will say, well, those are extraterrestrial beings. Others will say they're gringos who are harvesting organs. That's what you'll hear. Usually, one of those two. Half the people told me, oh, they're gringos. They're organ harvesters. The other half would tell me, no, these are extraterrestrials. And I would ask them, well, why do you say they're extraterrestrials? Because of the technology they have, and because of the way they move, and because of how tall they are. But if Talia is correct, and it was very traumatizing what she went through, this attempted abduction. And we're not talking alien abduction here. We're talking about much more visceral, violent abduction scenario with her. If it's true that she heard them speaking, and I say if it's true because, a person who goes through a very traumatizing event sometimes confabulates the details.
And they hallucinate too.
They hallucinate. Plus, they shot her with something. They stuck a syringe in her, so she wasn't altogether,
Yeah.
She was sedated to some extent. So that's why I say if she was, and remember I shouldn't say remember, I didn't tell you this, but before her experience, the attempted abduction on Talia, she was under the impression, she might have been under the impression, like many of the villagers were, that these were gringos who were organ harvesting, right? So she may have confabulated the gringo accent based on a preconceived notion of who these assailants were. Maybe not. Maybe she didn't. Maybe if in fact she did hear them speaking in Spanish and broken English, and I think we're dealing with human beings here. Whatever the case, it happened. I'm 100% convinced it happened. I think, I interviewed so many villagers, so many of them saw it. We're dealing with advanced aerospace technology. We're dealing with advanced, perhaps exosuit technology. And these hoverboards are definitely not conventional hoverboards.
Okay.
So, and I can go on and talk about this. I would direct people to a video I produced on my YouTube channel called, I think it's entitled Alien Expedition or Alien Attack Expedition Report. And you can see a picture of me standing there with the villagers. They all got their shotguns.
Yeah.
And I'm standing, me and my friend Mike, Doug are standing there surrounded by these villagers with their shotguns. And we also supplied the village with food and medical supplies, and we gave them some strategic technology. We gave them radios. We gave them night vision, legal night vision. We gave them night vision with recording capabilities. We gave them, what else did we give them? Oh, geez, I forgot. I haven't talked about this in a long time. We gave them various, I'm trying to remember what else we gave them. We gave them the night vision. We gave them the radios. Oh, high-powered flashlights. Okay. Really, really high-powered flashlights. And we gave them a thermal binocular, and some other supplies, some other strategic supplies, because they were conducting patrols at night. The men, every night, were patrolling the village, but, very low tech with flashlights that were not very powerful and shotguns with birdshot. We also gave them ammunition.
Do you know if they are still experiencing that? If it's still happening?
No, I'm still in contact with the village. No, it's not reoccurred. Maybe because we went there, but it's not reoccurred. No, not that phenomenon. Now they've seen some weird stuff, but they have not had any incursions into the village since I went there. And by the way, by the time I got there, it had been a couple of months had transpired since the last incident.
Okay.
So we went there to collect testimony.
Thank you for telling me that story. I find it really fascinating. I got one last question for you before you go.
Okay.
It's about the hearings that just happened, and there's going to be new hearings with Arrow and the Senate. I know that you have close contact with some of the politicians there. You talk to them often. You're good friends with some of them. What's your overall reaction to the hearings and the ones that are coming?
I think it was useful. I don't think it advanced the narrative very much. I think the last hearing was much more explosive, got a lot more attention. The allegations were more powerful from Grush. I think the witnesses were better. I appreciate the testimony of those guys. The NASA guy could have been asked a lot better questions, but because he wasn't asked the right questions, he was basically a waste of time. No offense to him, but he didn't offer any information that was really relevant to the topic. I thought Lou Elizondo performed very well. I think he came ready to say a lot more than he did, but he wasn't asked the right questions. I think some of the things he did say were explosive. For example, he confirmed that story, the rumor that there was a transference of technology of alien technology from Lockheed Martin to the Bigelow Aerospace Company that was blocked by the CIA. Elizondo confirmed that. He also confirmed that there was talk while he was at the Pentagon. There was talk of alien bodies that were retrieved from
That was
UFO crashes that had occurred decades ago. Elizondo said, in fact, before he was born. So we're probably looking at Roswell and some of the other famous UFO crash incidents. I would have dug into that for sure had I been given the opportunity to ask questions. But so there were some very important revelations and confirmations. The Immaculate Constellation program is very interesting. Schellenberger did a fairly good job, I think, presenting some of that material. I think Elizondo by far was the best witness. I don't know how you pronounce his name. I say Gallaudet because that's how it's spelled. The Admiral's testimony, I think it was worthwhile. I would have I think Mace, the best line of questioning came from Mace early on when she rapid fired some very important questions at those guys. And they answered in the affirmative. And some of those questions had to do with, have we recovered non-human craft? And the answer was a definitive yes from Elizondo.
Yeah.
And also I think from Gallaudet, if I recall. But so I think it was worthwhile. However, I will say this. I posted this yesterday on X. I think we need to be very careful moving forward. I think the next round of witnesses, should we do another hearing, need to be one of two things. I'll take either of these two things. A mix of these two things would be the best. We need guys that have had hands-on technology. Guys that are at the level of Bob Lazar. That's what we need. Either Bob Lazar, I doubt he'll do it, but Lazar or people equivalent to Lazar, we need that next. And I would say that or people who have been involved in the crash retrieval.
Yeah.
So either guys who've had hands on the technology, or witnesses who have participated in the actual retrieval of these craft. Not just people who have heard about it or know about it.
No, people who
one
were
of those
there.
two things, and I failed to mention that second thing in my post on X, but one of those two things needs to happen next. We need the guys who've been involved in the reverse engineering of the technology, or the guys who have been deployed to actually be involved in the recovery of the crash and bodies. Okay. Those are the kind of witnesses we need next. Anything less than that, and the whole enterprise is going to start losing credibility, and the public is going to lose interest.
And what about the Senate?
Oh, that's a dog and pony show. I don't care what Arrow says. I don't care. Okay. Arrow, and that's one of the major revelations that came out of this hearing. One of the most interesting testimonies came from the Admiral, who talked about the fact that he was brought in to be interviewed by the brass at Arrow, and instead of really trying to understand his story, they tried to coerce him into admitting that the Tic Tac incident and other very credible incidents were American technology. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And tried to coerce him into saying things that he didn't believe. So Arrow was not interviewing him in good faith with a genuine intention of getting at unraveling this mystery. Rather, they brought him in to indoctrinate him and coerce him into saying into strong manning or steel manning a particular narrative.
Yeah.
And that to me demonstrates that Arrow is a disinfo operation. So I don't care what Arrow says. I don't care what Gildebrand and the other senators ask them. You might as well just be interviewing NASA. It's the same thing. Arrow and NASA are basically the same thing. So I suspected for a long time that Arrow was just a disinfo operation, like Project Blue Book. It is. Don't care what they say. So, I mean, I'm probably feeling the same as a lot of people in this space, disappointed in the hearing to some extent. Also, there's a lot of grandstanding, and I don't know. What really disappoints me is some of the ufologists at the center of this thing. Well, let me back that up and restate that. Some of the quote unquote UFO researchers who are central to all of this are, I want to be kind, are not the caliber that we need to be at the center of this.
Yeah.
And I'm not referring to George Knapp. Let me make that clear. I like George Knapp. I think he is.
He's a legend.
He's great. George is great. I'm not referring to George Knapp. So I just think it's kind of a clown show. It's a circus, as you're probably aware, and a lot of people are aware. There's a circus unfolding behind the scenes. It's about people. It's about egos. A lot of people want credit for things. They want to be at the center. They want to be behind the camera.
Competition, which is
a lot of competition, and it's devolving into a circus. That's really bad for this effort. It's really bad. And it concerns me because I feel like it gives a lot of fodder to the debunkers and the naysayers, and it's going to cause a lot of the congressmen and women who are serious to back away from the topic.
Yeah, and it also doesn't feel, it feels, it doesn't feel casual. It feels like it's on purpose, some of these activities.
It's a clash of egos. It's a clash of egos. I wish that we had higher caliber people behind the scenes. Some of the people are, I would say, high caliber, but I think there's some individuals involved in this who have no business being frontmen for disclosure.
I agree.
It's gonna crash and burn if these guys are at the helm, and that's my opinion.
Yeah, I share it with you. It's nice that we didn't name any names because that would have gotten us probably more drama, and we don't want that.
And again, I completely support Knapp. I'm not referring to George Knapp, but
yeah. So thank you so much, Timothy. It's been a great conversation. If you would tell the people where they can find you, where they can find your material that is not otherwise available on the internet as easy, could you please?
I have a YouTube channel, Timothy Alberino. My handle is always at Timothy Alberino. YouTube, Instagram, X. I have a members community. If you're interested in that, you can go to thealberinoanalysis.com. And we're having great conversations in there. We're covering all kinds of stuff in there. Great community. No trolls. It's kind of like I always refer to it now as my skiff. I can talk about things in that community because it's private that I don't talk about publicly. And I have a website, timothyalberino.com. So you can find me in any of those locations.
All right, man. And thank you so much for your time. And let's stay in touch. Maybe we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, and I appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you so much, and see you guys later. Comment, like, subscribe, all of that stuff. Thank you, Timothy. Have a great
Thank you.
rest of your weekend.